Hi, I'm Jim Martin.
And I'm Amber McConnell.
We are here today to tell you about the Transition Assessment and Goal Generator, also known as the TAGG. The TAGG was developed with funding from the National Center for Special Education Research and the OU Zero Center for Learning Enrichment.
There are many transition assessments available, so you might be asking yourself why we need this one. The TAGG is an assessment that measures non-academic behaviors and experiences research has shown to increase the likelihood of having a job, going to college, or attending a technical training center after high school. Educators can use the results to determine which skills and experiences students already have and which ones they need before leaving high school. The TAGG produces a results profile that lists strengths, needs, present levels of performance, and generates sample Indicator 13 compliant annual transition goals based on individualized results.
Research and court decisions have stressed the importance of focusing on non-academic skills in transition planning. For example, in a case decided in 2009 by the Massachusetts Bureau of Special Education, Appeals versus Strict Cut Public, the hearing officer strongly reiterated the responsibilities of a school district to focus meaningful attention on non-academic goals and prepare students for independent living, employment, and post-secondary education. The district did not conduct adequate transition assessments, and the school district was ordered to provide compensation in the form of 2 additional years of meaningful transition services, despite the fact that the student had passed all needed academic tests and was eligible for his high school diploma.
Post-secondary goals often change over time. How many of us knew exactly what we wanted to be when we were in high school? Even though career goals may change over time, there are skills and experiences that generalize across all careers. We wanted our assessment to be useful for any post-secondary goal.
We designed the TAGG to assess secondary-age students with IEPs who plan to be competitively employed and/or enrolled in further education after graduation. Each TAGG set includes 3 versions: the student version, the family version, and the professional version. The assessment may be printed, taken by hand, but item scores must be entered then into a website to produce the results. Users have the option to listen to audio or watch ASL videos for TAGG instructions and for each item. The professional version is written at the 10.4 grade level, the family at the 5.7 grade level, and the student version is at the 4.8 grade level.
We used the Standards for Educational and Psychological Assessment to guide the development of the TAGG. So what we did, we tried to gather all of the known research for identifying behaviors that helped students to engage in either post-high school employment or further education. So initially we had 10 constructs, and we wrote items to go with these 10 constructs. Originally it was 75 items, and we had 15 TAGG versions before we have the one that we use today. Our initial 10 constructs included knowledge of strengths and limitations, actions related to strengths and limitations, disability awareness, employment, goal setting and attainment, persistence, proactive involvement, self-advocacy, supports, and utilization of resources. If you would like to read the full manuscript about these non-academic behaviors, it can be found in DCDT's journal, Career Development and Transition for Exceptional Individuals.
Once we had the items and we had our workable assessment after the 15 iterative versions, we then began to have the field try the TAGG out. And we did this over 3 years. But to do it first, we had users, and the users were teachers, parents of students with disabilities, as well as secondary students with disabilities, complete the initial test version of the TAGG. And as you can see from the slide, we had about 350 high school students with disabilities, 270 family members, and almost 40 professionals. As it turned out, each professional had about 10 or so on average students that they worked with. So we had students, families, and professionals complete the assessment. Once we took all the data, then we applied various factor analyses to the collected data, and it did its magic. And the factor analysis provided us the data, so we moved the factors from 10 down to 8. Then the items went from 75 to 34 items. So after the factor analysis, the professional and family tag, they pretty much stayed the same. 2 of the construct dropped. The 2 constructs that dropped were actions related to strengths and limitations and utilization of resources. And out of the 10 constructs, we then had 8 that remained, and disability awareness, interacting with others, goal setting and attainment, student involvement in the IEP. Interestingly, with student involvement in the IEP, we had the items really switched around on us. And originally that construct was called self-advocacy. But once we were done with the factor analysis, the items that remained were all related to student involvement in their IEP meeting, and so we changed the name of that construct to student involvement in IEP. For those of you who love statistics, you can see our fit statistics were all within the acceptable ranges for this first year of field testing the actual TAGG assessment. The student version, interestingly, the same 34 items, but we had 2 constructs drop, but 2 constructs combined together, strengths and limitations and support community. So for the student version, we have 7 constructs, same 34 items. We used a statistical analysis called item response theory. This is the modern approach to analyzing assessment data. And what IRT enables us to do is we can scale different types of items, whether it's on a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale or a yes/no answer. And then it provides us a common way of measuring the items across different types of items. And then, based upon the responses of all of the people in the sample, then we can weigh items differently by their relative importance. The IRT algorithms produce the results for the profile. The IRT enables us to place onto the scale a common metric. We projected the item characteristics, such as item difficulty, onto the scale, and the item difficulty was in part measured by those that were the hardest. And then it enabled us to conduct a within-student comparison of scores across construct to determine relative strengths and weaknesses. So from this profile, we have the identified strengths, the identified weaknesses, and it provides us the relative strengths and the relative weaknesses. And then we did a within-construct comparison of the item responses to generate then appropriate annual transition goals identified to improve the students' weak areas. The TAGG is currently being used in all 50 states, and countries such as Puerto Rico and Spain have also shown interest in using the TAGG. The cost is $3 per set. A set includes a student, professional, and family version. You can find out more at tagg.ou.edu/TAGG. Federal special education laws provide little guidance when it comes to transition assessment. We know post-secondary goals must be based on the results of age-appropriate transition assessments. We must look to position papers and court rulings to better understand this requirement. For instance, Prince, Plotner, and Yale recently examined district court findings and recommended the use of multiple assessments across transition domains and warned against using only informal assessments, which means at least one of the transition assessments in the transition assessment battery needs supporting validity evidence.
Basic questions you can ask to determine if an assessment is valid for your intended use include: what is the purpose of the assessment? For whom was it designed? How were the items developed? Does ample validity evidence exist in the areas of factor structure, internal reliability, and test-retest reliability? Is the assessment free from bias? And do the results of the assessment predict outcomes?
The TAGG provides more validity evidence than the vast majority of transition assessments available today. A complete copy of the TAGG manual is available for download at no cost at the Zero Center website. The TAGG has two websites. We have a public website and we have a demonstration website that we just call the demo website. The demo website is available for professors who would like to use it in their courses, for researchers who want to use the TAGG in their research studies, and it's also available for professional development professionals within districts or in other groups who would like to show the TAGG to their educators. So the TAGG demo site, all you have to do is contact the Zero Center and we'll create a tag for you if you fit into one of those previous categories of people. And we'll give you TAGG credits that you can then create active assessments to demonstrate how it works.
So here we are at the TAGG website, and we already have students loaded in. So this is Coach Stoops and his special education students. And adding a new student would be as easy as clicking creating a new assessment, then putting in the name of the student. It's that simple. So for the students we have here, you can see that Julian already has the professional version completed and the family version completed. The student, you can open it, you can email it, or you can print it because we understand that not all schools or homes have access to computers. So we'll first look at a professional version. So each item does have an audio function.
The student told someone what he or she does well.
We know that working with high school students, a lot of times they don't want to wait for an entire assessment to be read, but maybe there's an item or two that has a word they may not understand. One of the most common asked questions is the word accommodations, and that can spark a great conversation between the teacher and the student. Here is the ASL video.
Number 1. The student told someone what he or she does well.
As we said previously, the TAGG has 34 items, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. The professional version actually explains each construct before that section, and the parent and student version does not. We'll take a look at the student version. As you can see, the items are now in first person and in more simplified language for the student. We do have this at below a 5th grade level for reading. And some of the words that increased that readability were words such as accommodations or vocational rehabilitation. But we do think these are important words for students to know. So we chose to keep them in.
A question that I know a lot of you may have is, can students leave halfway through and come back and finish the assessment later? The answer to that is no. It's a short enough assessment. It's designed to be done in one setting. And so students need to start and work all the way through it. And it will save then when they're finished.
We really try to listen to assessment users when they called the Zero Center. For example, one teacher called and she really wanted the profile to be viewed before maybe the parent version was returned. Some parents got it in quickly, some parents did not, but she didn't want to make the assessment unavailable to the family by clicking skip this user because she was afraid that they might show up with it later. So we have made it where the profile can be viewed before all 3 assessments are taken. And we know that sometimes you're never going to get all 3, and that's when you could use the skip this user and it will drop down to the completed section. But we have a combined graphic that clearly shows differences in scores. And we found that a lot of times the scores can be pretty similar, but you can definitely get conversations going when we see that a parent is rating the child a lot higher than the professional. Maybe it's time to talk about the differences that the parent and the professional are seeing.
We actually did a study on this and found a moderate correlation between the users' ratings which for this type of an assessment actually is pretty good.
So here's an example of a combined profile with all three users giving results for the student. As you can see in the area of persistence, they were all in agreement of where the child scored. So this is a great comparison. Sometimes when we give assessments, you have three different profiles, and you're kind of using a visual analysis to figure out how the student did for those. So after this, we have the areas of greatest strength, areas of relative strength, areas of greatest need, areas of relative need, and present levels of performance. A lot of educators have really liked the present levels of performance because they can simply copy and paste this directly into an IEP. Next, we have suggested annual transition goals ranked by greatest need, and we tell you whose responses generated this need. So based on the family responses, employment was the biggest area, and there are a couple of example goals that could be copy and pasted into the IEP. Based on student responses, the biggest area of need was disability awareness. We've gotten questions like, well, with all of these options, which ones do I use? This is a great way to get students more involved in their IEP. We could ask them, so here are the results of your assessment. Which goals would you like to work on for the next year? You see on the right column that we have the Common Core standard that corresponds with the goals. That does not mean these were written for the Common Core standards. Most of these goals could be completed in an English class, so we have found where those items would match into Common Core. If you do not use Common Core, we actually have a button that you can click, and the Common Core standard will not appear.
If we go back to the top at the graphic profile, because we use IRT algorithms, we can take the different types of responses and put them on a common metric. And as you see at the bottom of the employment area, for instance, we have average, below average, well below average, above average, well above average. And based upon the students' responses and our norm sample, this graphic will show us how the student did relative to all the other students in our norm sample. If we look at one more, say student involvement in the IEP, the professional actually found that the student is more engaged in their own IEP meeting than the parent or the student thought. And so it takes all three to get the best profile possible. Truth is out there, and the truth doesn't just lie within the student's perception or the family's perception or even the professional's perception. But together, we do have an idea of what truth is. And so as we take the results and look at the recommended annual transition goals, we'll find those that together everyone believes are the most important to learn. And then these can be copied and pasted into the IEP. And then once they are copied and pasted in, they can then be modified if needed to change the criteria a bit. Maybe you want that criteria to be 80% rather than 90%, or maybe you want to change the behavior a little bit. So it gives a lot of flexibility to the annual transition goals that are picked.
So with our funding from IES, we were able to collect 3 years of data to really make this a sound assessment. We had over 2,500 participants from 42 states and 162 schools. So a lot of professionals, and we were actually very impressed with the number of family members who also participated in our studies. So what we did with the initial assessment we sent it out, had approximately 250 students, their teachers, and their family members take it, brought it back. We conducted a factor analysis. Once we had the structure for that assessment, we sent it out again to round 2. And these were new participants, and we brought it back, did another factor analysis. And just to make sure we had a sound psychometric structure, we sent it out one more time, brought it back, and across the 3 phases, the fit indices were very similar and acceptable for a good assessment.
And each round that we did took an academic year, basically. So 3 rounds of of data collection. Each round was done during an academic year. Predictive validity is a concept that ought to be central to transition assessments, because we want to know if what the results are, if those are going to predict outcomes for students once they're out of high school. Surprisingly, very few transition assessments have any predictive validity. To determine predictive validity for the TAGG, we did a follow-up study of about 300 former high school students who had left school either 1 to 4 years earlier. They completed the TAGG in high school. Then we contacted them to see what they were doing, if they were involved in higher education, if they were working full-time, and various other questions about their lifestyle. We took the data from the 300 students once they left high school, and we used statistical analyses to determine the relation between the TAGG non-academic behaviors and their post-secondary education and employment outcomes in particular. Look at what we found out. We found out that most of the TAGG constructs predict student outcomes. Let me say that one more time. We found out that most of the TAGG constructs predict student outcomes. Student involvement in the IEP, interacting with others, support community, goal setting and attainment. These 4 constructs predicted further education. 4 more constructs predicted employment, student involvement in the IEP, interacting with others, support community, and as you would expect, the employment construct. We looked at internal validity. Internal validity is basically how well the assessment hangs together itself. And generally a good score is between 0.7 and 0.8. Each TAGG version, the parent, the professional, and the student, had great overall internal consistency ranging from 0.89 to 0.95. So it definitely is within that range of what we consider a good assessment for internal reliability.
We also looked at test-retest reliability, and students generally took the test again after 14 weeks to see if their scores were about the same. Of course, they may have had experiences in that 14 weeks that would have slightly changed the scores, but we found that there was a large correlation between the first and second administrations. So we know that our test is going to be reliable and not one of the tests where on any given day you might score completely differently.
We examined the impact of placement and students' GPA for about 650 students from over 70 high schools across 9 states. We examined their TAGG scores and where students were in the high school, especially their general education placement. And we found, drum roll, Amber?
We found no meaningful connection between TAGG scores and percent of time spent in general education. So often we're pushing for inclusion, and that's great. But it doesn't necessarily mean that students have all of the non-academic skills they need for success after high school. We also looked at TAGG scores and GPA and found, once again, there were no meaningful correlations between the two, meaning that just because someone has a high GPA, they may not have all of the non-academic skills they need for life after high school. I think we all probably can remember that one student in high school who had a great GPA and then flopped once it came to life. You can read more about our study on GPA and time in general education in an article in Remedial and Special Education.
Fairness. Transition assessments need to be fair. Fair by gender, fair by income, and other factors. And so we wanted to know if differences exist by gender. And what we found was that no overall differences exist for the TAGG P or the TAGG S, the TAGG Professional or the TAGG Student. Interestingly, the TAGG F, the family version, we did find small overall differences.
Some of the differences on the TAGG-S included that females rated themselves higher on student involvement than males. That means getting involved in their own IEP. And if you know any teenage girls versus teenage boys, a lot of times girls are going to talk more than the teenage boys in the first place. Males rated themselves higher on employment. And once again, if you spend a lot of time with teenagers, more often than not, males will seek employment before girls will. You can read more about the influence of gender on non-academic skills in DCDT's journal, Career Development and Transition for Exceptional Individuals.
Structure fit by disability category. The TAGG was designed specifically not to be for one specific disability category. And so we had students complete the TAGG from across the country from most of the disability categories. And what we found was that the structure held across all of the major disability category.
So we also looked for fairness within disability categories. So we wanted to know if students with autism scored differently than students with ED or ID. We did find, and once again, you may find this humorous if you work with students with disabilities, students with ED and autism did have lower scores on interacting with others, which shouldn't be a huge surprise. It just means that those students may have that construct come up more often as a need. Students with autism scored themselves as having no problems with interacting with others. And if you know a lot of teenagers with autism, usually the problem is other people's problem. So professionals and family members tended to score students with autism lower than students with ID, OHI, and learning disabilities.
So those were the expected differences almost. Except for those, there really were no overall differences in scores by disability category, which is just what you would want in a transition assessment. Fairness. This one surprised us. Socioeconomic status, income levels of family. We use free and reduced lunch as the eligibility statistic for this particular measure. And we found no significant differences on the construct scores for the TAGG professional or the TAGG student based on free and reduced lunch eligibility. There were some small differences on the TAGG-F, but nothing really meaningful, as you'll now see.
So we did find one difference for this study, and we found that families with higher education levels scored their students lower. And we can't really say why because we didn't look into the why in this study. But when asked, a lot of people say that maybe parents with higher education levels also have higher expectations for their students.
So there were no differences in employment, but that one small difference based on family education background. So how close are the student, professional, and family TAGG scores? We found moderate correlations across the parent, educator, and student versions when assessing the same student. This is actually a great result for this type of an assessment. We compared the TAGG with the AIR self-determination assessment, and what we found was a medium correlation, which is just what we would want because the TAGG does address self-determination constructs, but it does more. And so we wouldn't want a high correlation because then we would be measuring the same thing. But with a medium correlation, we found the self-determined aspect of it is picked up, but it's also measuring something else. And that something else, we believe, are more additional non-academic skills that we know are critical for post-school positive outcomes.
To find more information on the validity and reliability of the TAGG, go to tagg.ou.edu/TAGG and click on Learn About the TAGG.
So once Learn About the TAGG is clicked on and the next window open, there are several resources available at no cost to learn more about the TAGG, from the TAGG overview, from a demo video, a list of TAGG constructs, the user's guide that presents common questions and answers, sample TAGG pages, and the technical manual can be downloaded free of charge. So go to the TAGG website, explore, learn about the TAGG, create a TAGG account, and then log back in and use the TAGG.